For years, I kept buying fertilizer every spring. Bags stacked in the shed. Bottles lined up beside the hose. And every season, I hoped the garden would finally look healthier for longer than a few weeks. Sometimes it did. The plants would turn greener for a short while. Leaves would grow quickly. Tomatoes would suddenly shoot upward. But then the heat would arrive, or the soil would dry, and the garden would begin looking tired all over again. What confused me most was one small corner near an old buried pipe. The plants there stayed healthier longer. Their leaves looked fuller. The soil stayed softer. During dry weather, that area seemed to struggle less than the rest of the garden. The strange part was this. I had actually started feeding that section less. And after a few months, the soil itself stopped acting tired. After watching gardens struggle through hard summers, dry ground, and compacted soil for many years, this became one of the few methods I've seen continue improving quietly over time instead of fading away after a few weeks. If composting has ever felt messy or complicated, you're not doing anything wrong. Many people feel the same way. Some systems ask for too much turning, lifting, sorting, or constant attention. This was different. By the end of this video, you'll understand why many gardeners quietly use a simple underground pipe instead of relying only on store fertilizer. But before explaining why this happened, it helps to understand what often goes wrong in the soil itself. Many gardens today are fed often, but supported very little. That sounds backward at first, but over time it becomes easier to notice. A quick fertilizer can wake plants up fast. Leaves turn green. Growth speeds up. The garden suddenly looks alive again. But underneath the surface, the soil may still be dry, compacted, or lacking life. It is a little like giving a tired person strong coffee every day without helping them truly rest or recover. Plants need nutrients, of course. But healthy gardens also depend on living soil. Tiny organisms. Moisture. Air pockets. Worm activity. Organic matter slowly breaking down. All these things work together quietly under the surface. When soil loses that living activity, it often becomes harder each season. Water runs off faster. Roots struggle more. Plants become dependent on repeated feeding because the soil is no longer helping naturally. This is why some gardeners feel trapped in a cycle. More fertilizer leads to quick growth, but the soil itself never truly improves. And this is where the underground pipe begins to matter. Because the pipe is not mainly feeding the plants directly. It is feeding something underneath the plants that many gardeners rarely think about. Earthworms may not look important at first, but healthy soil depends heavily on them. In many gardens, worms are doing quiet work day and night without anyone noticing. As worms move through the ground, they create tiny tunnels. These tunnels help water soak deeper into the soil instead of sitting on top or evaporating quickly. Air moves more easily underground too, which helps roots stay healthier. Worms also pull organic material deeper into the soil. Small bits of leaves, scraps, and decaying matter are broken down slowly over time. What comes out becomes rich material that plants can actually use. This process is gentle. Slow. Steady. And often, that slow pace creates stronger long-term results. Many older gardeners notice this change in a practical way first. The soil becomes easier to dig. It feels less heavy after rain. Water does not disappear as quickly during hot weather. Even weeding sometimes becomes easier because the ground softens naturally. But worms do not gather everywhere equally. They move toward moisture, food, and stable conditions. And that is exactly what the pipe changes. Over time, the pipe creates one small underground area that attracts activity below the surface. Then slowly, season after season, that activity begins spreading outward into the surrounding soil. At first, the change can seem almost invisible. Then one day, you notice one side of the garden staying healthier longer than the other. So what exactly is a worm pipe? The idea is surprisingly simple. It is usually just a vertical pipe placed partly underground. Many people use leftover plastic pipe or drainage pipe with small holes drilled along the sides. Part of the pipe stays above ground with a loose cover on top. Inside the pipe go simple kitchen scraps, vegetable peels, coffee grounds, soft fruit scraps, crushed eggshells, small bits of plant matter. The holes allow worms and tiny organisms to move in and out freely underground. Instead of building a large compost pile somewhere far from the garden, the breakdown happens directly where plants can benefit from it. But this is important to understand. A worm pipe is not fast. It does not create instant rich compost in a few days. It works quietly over time. Little by little, the surrounding soil becomes more active and balanced. And because most of the process happens underground, there is usually less smell, less mess, and less effort compared to larger compost systems. The surprising part is that the worms do most of the work while you are not even looking. You place small scraps into the pipe occasionally, and underground life slowly handles the rest. In many ways, it feels less like managing a system and more like supporting a natural cycle already happening beneath the soil. The first change I noticed was not dramatic. There were no giant vegetables overnight. No sudden explosion of growth. It was quieter than that. Plants near the pipe simply stayed greener longer. During warmer weather, those plants looked less stressed in the afternoon sun. Leaves stayed firmer. The soil nearby dried out more slowly after watering. At first, I honestly thought it was coincidence. Maybe that corner received slightly different sunlight. Maybe water pooled there more naturally. I watched for several weeks before realizing the pattern kept repeating. Even after hot days, the soil near the pipe still looked darker and more alive. The surrounding areas became dusty faster. Then came another small surprise. After rain, the ground near the pipe stayed crumbly instead of forming a hard crust. When I pressed my fingers into the soil, it broke apart gently instead of feeling packed tight. That change mattered more than I expected. Healthy soil often looks soft and slightly uneven. There is movement in it. Tiny air spaces. Moisture holding below the surface. Dead soil tends to behave differently. It hardens quickly. Water runs away faster. Roots struggle to spread. The worm pipe was not magically feeding the plants from above. It was slowly changing the condition of the soil underneath them. And once that process began, the garden started supporting itself a little more naturally. Of course, some people try worm pipes and become disappointed quickly. Usually, the problem is not the pipe itself. It is the expectation placed on it. One of the biggest mistakes people make is overfeeding the pipe. It can be tempting to treat it like a garbage container. Large piles of scraps get pushed inside all at once. Heavy foods. Oils. Meat. Dairy. Too much material packed tightly together. That usually creates problems. The pipe works best when it stays balanced and breathable. Small amounts added gradually are often enough. Worms and microbes need time to process what goes in. If too much waste builds up too quickly, the system can smell unpleasant or attract pests. Simple scraps work best. Vegetable peels. Coffee grounds. Soft plant leftovers. Small amounts added steadily over time. Patience matters here too. Many beginners expect visible compost within days. But healthy soil improvement usually happens over months and seasons instead of overnight. If your first attempt does not seem very active right away, that is very normal. Sometimes the worms take time to discover the area. Sometimes weather affects activity. Sometimes the soil nearby is still recovering from years of dryness or chemical feeding. The good news is that worm pipes are forgiving. They do not need perfection. Small consistent habits matter more than complicated routines. And over time, the underground system often becomes more stable on its own. Climate also changes how worm pipes behave. In dry regions, moisture becomes especially important. Worms naturally avoid areas that become completely dry for long periods. In hot weather, adding a little water occasionally near the pipe can help maintain activity underground. Some gardeners even notice that the soil near the pipe stays cooler during intense summer heat. In wetter climates, drainage matters more. If the ground stays soaked constantly, the area can lose oxygen. Worms prefer damp conditions, but not standing water. Loose soil and proper drainage help keep the system balanced. Cold climates bring another pattern entirely. During winter, activity often slows down naturally. The garden may appear inactive above ground. Fewer worms move near the surface. Scraps break down more slowly. At first, some people think the system has stopped working. But underground, quiet changes still continue. Moisture shifts through the soil. Organic matter softens gradually. Tiny organisms remain active below freezing levels in many regions. Then when spring warmth returns, worm activity increases again surprisingly fast. This seasonal rhythm is important to understand because many natural systems work in cycles rather than constant speed. Gardening becomes less stressful once we stop expecting every part of nature to perform the same way year-round. The worm pipe adapts slowly to the environment around it. And often, the longer it stays in place, the more stable the surrounding soil becomes. One benefit people rarely talk about is how much easier this system can feel physically. Large compost piles often require turning, lifting, carrying, and constant management. Heavy fertilizer bags can strain the back and shoulders over time. Repeated soil treatments become tiring, especially during hot weather. But a worm pipe asks for very little at once. A few kitchen scraps dropped in occasionally. A quick check now and then. Small habits instead of major labor. For older gardeners, that matters. For caregivers helping parents or family members maintain a garden, it matters too. The garden slowly begins doing more work on its own. As soil improves, watering sometimes becomes less frequent because moisture holds longer underground. Digging becomes easier because the ground softens naturally. Plants recover from stress more steadily instead of swinging between rapid growth and decline. None of this happens instantly. But over time, the entire garden can begin feeling calmer to manage. That may sound strange to someone who has only experienced gardening as constant maintenance. Yet healthy systems often reduce effort instead of increasing it. Nature tends to prefer balance over force. And the worm pipe supports balance quietly beneath the surface. After one full growing season, the biggest changes were not dramatic enough to impress someone walking through the garden for 5 minutes. But living with the garden every day made the difference easier to notice. Plants looked steadier. The soil felt healthier in my hands. Watering became more predictable because the ground stayed moist longer instead of drying unevenly. Roots seemed stronger. Plants recovered from hot afternoons faster. And interestingly, I stopped reaching for fertilizer as often without even planning to. At first, I still bought some out of habit. But gradually, the need felt smaller. The garden no longer looked desperate for constant feeding. That does not mean fertilizer is always bad. In some situations, plants truly need extra nutrients. Poor soil may need support while recovering. But healthier soil usually creates more stable plants over time. And stability became the biggest difference of all. The biggest change was not faster growth. It was how balanced the garden became. Some weeks looked better than others, of course. Every garden still faces heat, storms, insects, or dry periods. But the extreme swings became less severe. The soil seemed more alive. And once a garden begins supporting itself naturally, the gardener often feels less pressure too. If you already use compost, raised beds, mulch, or natural gardening methods, you may have noticed similar patterns over time. Small improvements beneath the soil eventually change the entire feel of the garden above it. Healthy gardens often need less than we think. Not less care, but less force. Many gardeners spend years trying to fix plants from the outside while the soil quietly asks for support underneath. The encouraging part is that soil can recover slowly when life returns to it. Worms help. Moisture helps. Organic matter helps. Time helps too. You do not need perfect compost systems or expensive products to begin improving the garden. Often, simple observation matters more. Watch which areas stay moist longer. Notice where worms gather after rain. Pay attention to how the soil feels in your hands from season to season. Gardens communicate constantly, but usually very quietly. And when we slow down enough to notice those patterns, gardening often becomes simpler. If you're comfortable sharing, I'd be curious to know whether your soil tends to stay dry quickly or hold moisture for a long time during summer. Different gardens teach different lessons. In the end, the worm pipe was never really about one pipe. It was about rebuilding activity beneath the surface instead of constantly correcting problems above it. And sometimes the healthiest gardens come from doing a little less and letting the soil do a little more. Sometimes the garden improves when we simply step back and observe.